So they were hiding a number of things away from the public interest. Now, are there legitimate secrets to keep? Yes, there are legitimate secrets, but those are very, very small in number, like nuclear codes and nuclear technology, things of that nature, troop movements, ship movements, things of in that category, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some kind of larger is certain critical elements of national defense. Yeah, you just don't want anybody, including the public, just knowing about it. And we even had, so they were hiding a number of things away from the public interest. Now, are there legitimate secrets to keep? Yes, there are legitimate secrets, but those are very, very small in number, like nuclear codes and nuclear technology, things of that nature, troop movements, ship movements, things of in that category, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some kind of larger is certain critical elements of national defense. Yeah, you just don't want anybody, including the public, just knowing about it. And we even had, there's a whole system involved where you could actually release things that were unclassified that would still reflect, but would not reveal, as we would call it, and when I say we, the royal we, sources and methods. The one thing you always protected were sources and methods. So here I am knowing I've been targeted. So you can imagine this is the spring of 2006. I had been in contact with a reporter anonymously. She didn't even know who I was for another year about all this, but with unclassified information. And I was put under electronic and physical surveillance. I would never want anybody to go through what I do. It reminded me of, going back to the Cold War and certain other regimes in other foreign lands that, end up monitoring their population. Here I was being directly targeted, and I had FBI agents following me around for quite a while, both surreptitiously as well as in later kind of in the open, and plus all kinds of electronic surveillance. You can imagine, here it is, end of November 2007. So this is almost, a year and a half plus later from the time I was targeted. I'm getting ready. At the time, I was teaching at the National Defense University down at Fort McNair, and I was getting ready for work. And I look out the window, and there's all these cars pulling up, and FBI agents streaming out across the front yard, and huge knock at the door, and they're about to bust in. My son opened the door, and they had a warrant. They actually had gone to a magistrate judge in Maryland to get a warrant, and they served it on me. And they rifled, basically turned the house inside out for the next 9 hours. It was the last time that I formally wanted. It was like, well, here's a chance. But they didn't want to hear about any of my whistleblowing. They didn't want to hear about the violation of law. They didn't want to hear about, up to and including the president. All they said is, we're here to collect evidence. And they took just about anything that looked like evidence, books, papers, pretty much everything electronic. There were some funny moments. My original days of computing began with 8-bit computers. Home computers. My first computer was an Atari 800, which I still enjoy going back to those days. And they're carrying out my old Atari computers. And I said, and I actually remember the guys coming up from my basement office, and I looked down at him as he's coming up. I said, "You really need to take that? That's technology goes back to the late 70s." And he actually looked down at it and said, "No, we don't." And he put it back on the shelf. It was just one of those moments.
How did it resolve itself? I mean, it looks like the full force of the government was thrown at you.
We're talking, it turned out, and this is an article in the New York Times in 2010, right? I mean, I just skipped ahead several years. So there was this multi-million-dollar 5 full-time prosecutors, 25 full-time agents. They were pulling FBI agents from their mole hunter unit, which is specifically trained to go after real spies, right? That's how serious they were about me. That's how the level of threat I allegedly posed for the government and causing grave, we're not just talking regular damage, but the gravest of damage to the national security of the United States. That's the level at which I was targeted because of the New York Times article. So that was revealed in the New York Times in July of 2010. So what happened between November and then when I was formally indicted in April? So I was working for Apple. I mean, I ended up leaving. I resigned. It was clear they're going to permanently remove. They already suspended my clearance. They put me on administrative leave. And so in April of 2008, I'm behind several eight balls. I end up resigning under a very dark cloud. And in April of 2010, I was formally indicted. I ended up hiring at extraordinary expense. We're talking $500 plus an hour and then some. A criminal defense attorney because it's like, wow, how am I going to do all this? Because I could end up in prison for many, many years, if not decades, just given how hell-bent the government was on not just making an example of me, but putting me away as punishment for having dared blow the whistle on a program. And it's still surreal when I say it this way, that I was being, it was criminal to expose or disclose crimes committed by the state, because in fact that became the crime. It was a crime against the state to reveal a state crime. I still shake my head to this day. So for the next 14 months, a combination of criminal defense attorneys, pro bono attorneys that went to bat for me because I knew I'd have to influence the court of public opinion. Long story short, a whole series of things started to happen. I had public defenders because I was unable. My criminal defense attorney didn't want to go forward for the pretrial proceedings. He said, I'll help support it, and others declined because their law firm said, if you want to defend, even though they knew it was a huge First Amendment case, if you want to defend Mr. Drake, you're going to have to leave the law firm. And these were very high-powered law firms. So here I was with public defenders. I was declared indigent before the court because at this point I'd spent umpteen tens and tens of thousands of dollars on the private criminal defense attorney. I'm completely exposed. We're talking many, many years in prison, many. And I've skipped over a whole bunch of stuff in terms of what led up to that. Multiple attempts to get me to plead out to like 25 plus years, right, in prison for what I had done against the U.S. And so for the next 14 months, so we're talking between April and June. So on the day before, it's the scheduled day before, this is Thursday in June of 2011. This is after Jane Mayer's article came out in the New Yorker. I was then interviewed by Scott Pelley with 60 Minutes. I was awarded the Ridenhour Truth-Telling Prize, right, for my whistleblowing or truth-telling. On the very eve, the jury had already been selected, plus the alternates. And on the eve of the trial date, which was to be basically the formal selection of the jury, which was to begin on the Monday. So that's the Monday after the Thursday. During a break, there was a chance, came up at the last minute during the break, and all of a sudden an off-ramp appeared. And basically on my terms, I was able to plead out they dropped all, but it was on the condition they had to drop all the 10 felony counts. Remember, I was facing many, many decades, felony count indictments, obstruction of justice, quote unquote, 4 counts for lying, which I was actually telling the truth, but they said I was lying to the FBI agents, and then 5 felony counts under the Espionage Act for quote unquote retaining for the purpose of disclosure, which wasn't even in the law, highly basically defense intelligence information. So I was able, no fine, no jail time, 240 hours of community service, 1 year probation. And I went free. And that's how I, quote unquote, escaped, right, from ending up in prison.
Thomas, I feel like we could talk about, I mean, I know that we're just scratching the surface. And I know I only have an hour with you. I have a hard out here in a few minutes as well. So, two things. I'm going to talk to the producers. We definitely need to link up again for a longer episode so we can dive into it.
Sure.
I'm curious, and maybe the best way to close is I know you're out of the intelligence game at this point, but given what you saw, given what you experienced, given how you saw the government and the entities inside of it act, what are your thoughts on likely the current state of surveillance against U.S. citizens from the U.S. government? What's your anecdotal temperature take of what's the current situation?
Anecdotal. We know about the Snowden disclosures. Yep. I knew, even as I left in 2008, that the system, and of course, I'll just say it this way, had begun to fully metastasize, meaning it was not a one-off. It was not temporary. It was now part of the system.